Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're settling into bed, unwinding after a long day, or simply letting your mind drift gently into the evening, this space is made for you. Before we begin tonight's journey, may I ask, where in the world are you listening from? It's always lovely to imagine this quiet little corner of curiosity stretching across time zones and tucked away bedrooms. If you enjoy calming, thoughtful explorations like this, I'd be truly grateful if you could tap the like button and subscribe. And to those of you who are already part of this slow, sleepy adventure, thank you so much for being here. Now, I'll do my best not to make this too fascinating, but if it does keep you awake, at least you'll leave with a head full of wonderful questions and the strange satisfaction of learning something you never knew you needed to know. So tonight, we're asking a very old, very strange question, one that has puzzled scientists, philosophers, and daydreamers alike. If we can't see it, hold it, or stop it, is time even real? Time. It ticks, it flows, it marches on, or so we say. We mark our days with it, measure our lives by it, and yet, no one has ever touched it. You can't bottle time or drop it on your foot or put it in your pocket. It's invisible, intangible, and slippery. The more we try to define it, the more it seems to twist away from our grasp like mist in moonlight. In the next few hours, we'll drift gently through some of the strangest, sleepiest questions that time has ever inspired. What exactly is this thing we're always running out of? Why does it feel faster when we're older? Why does it slow to a crawl in awkward conversations, or vanish entirely when we're lost in a dream? And perhaps most mysterious of all, could time itself be nothing more than an illusion? We'll explore the way your brain stretches and shrinks time without your permission. We'll hear what Einstein thought about clocks on rockets, why physicists are arguing over whether time even belongs in their equations, and how ancient thinkers imagined time as a wheel instead of a line. We'll visit the past, glance at the future, and rest for a moment in the strange, elusive now. But don't worry, there's no need to hold on to every detail. This journey is slow and soft, designed to accompany you as you doze or daydream. If you nod off along the way, that's perfectly fine. The questions will still be here when you wake up, so just lie back, breathe deeply, and let yourself wonder, what if time isn't what it seems at all? Time is often described as a river, a steady, endless current carrying us from the past, through the present, and into the future. It flows, we say, it passes, it flies when we're having fun and drags when we're not. We talk about saving time, wasting time, losing time, finding time. But what is time, really? If you ask most people, they'll point to clocks, hours, minutes, seconds, little slices of something that feels both constant and mysterious. We wake to alarms, count down to birthdays, watch the seasons turn like pages in a calendar. Spring blooms into summer, leaves fall, snow drifts quietly over rooftops. Time feels like the rhythm behind everything. Our hair greys, our bones ache, and we say, time is passing. But that everyday understanding might only scratch the surface, because when we look closely, really closely, time starts to lose its shape. At its core, time seems to be how we register change. The sun moves across the sky, shadows stretch and shrink. We age, objects shift. Without change, would time still exist? Imagine a universe frozen in perfect stillness. No particles jiggling, no stars exploding, no thoughts flickering in a single brain. Could such a universe contain time at all? Or would it be suspended in a timeless state, not just quiet, but utterly still in every possible sense? Philosophers have long wrestled with this. Some argue that time is inseparable from change, that it has no meaning unless something happens. No ticking clock, no falling apple, no heartbeat, no time. Others suggest that time might exist independently, like a blank canvas even if no brush ever touches it. Isaac Newton believed in absolute time, a kind of invisible background ticking away whether anything happened or not. Gottfried Leibniz disagreed, insisting that time was just a way to describe the sequence of events, nothing more. Modern physics tends to lean closer to Leibniz. Many scientists see time not as a thing in itself, but as a relationship between things. It's not a thread woven through the universe, but a language we use to describe how one state becomes another. An ice cube melts, a match burns, a person laughs. Without these changes, the idea of before and after would have no meaning. Even the units we use to measure time are based on motion. A second, for example, was once defined by the swing of a pendulum, and now by the vibration of a cesium atom. We don't measure time in time, we measure it in movement. If everything in the universe paused at once, would a minute still pass? Some thinkers take this idea further. They argue that time isn't a physical property at all. It's a mental framework, a construct the human brain uses to make sense of a world in motion. Our minds, in this view, are like editors stitching together the frames of reality into a coherent story. Without that stitching, there would be no past, no present, no future, just a kaleidoscope of moments, each one isolated and incomplete. And yet, we feel time deeply. We remember, we anticipate, we regret, we hope. These emotions seem to give time a kind of gravity. They pull it closer, make it matter. But it may be that we've mistaken the story for the structure, that time is not something we're in, but something we're constantly creating. This opens a strange and wonderful possibility, that time might not be as real as it feels, that it could be a useful illusion, a scaffolding for memory, experience, and thought, a brilliant trick of the mind that turns change into narrative. And yet, clocks keep ticking, the seasons still turn, our hearts beat on. Whether time is a river, a rhythm, or a remarkably convincing mirage, it continues to shape the way we live, even if we can't quite say what it is. What if time doesn't exist at all? Not as a flowing river or a ticking clock, but simply as a way of describing change. Imagine, for a moment, that what we call time is nothing more than a convenient label we've given to the unfolding of different arrangements of matter, like pages in a photo album. No current, no motion, no flow, just a succession of still images, each one slightly different from the last. This idea isn't just whimsical, it's one of the more provocative philosophical questions in physics. Is time just change? Could it be that what we think of as time is simply the way we perceive difference? After all, without change, what would indicate that any time had passed at all? Consider a film reel. Each individual frame is perfectly static, frozen in place. There's no motion in a single image, but play those frames in order and our minds fill in the gaps. Suddenly, a story emerges. A character walks across a room, a spaceship lifts off, a cat knocks something off a table in high-definition rebellion. Yet none of that movement actually exists within any single frame. The motion, like time, is something that arises only when the frames are seen in sequence. In this analogy, each now could be like one of those film frames, a frozen moment, complete but disconnected. String enough of them together in the right order, and the illusion of time begins. But are we seeing time itself, or just movement? This leads to a profound question. Can time be reduced entirely to change? If the universe is simply transitioning from one state to another, does that make time a side effect of those changes, rather than something real in its own right? The physicist Julian Barber thinks so. He argues that time is not fundamental to the universe at all. Instead, what exists is a vast collection of possible configurations of the cosmos. He calls them nows. In his view, each now is a complete self-contained snapshot of the universe. These nows don't evolve, they just are. The sensation of movement, of past leading to future, is just our mind stitching them into a coherent sequence. According to Barber, we don't live in time, we live among a landscape of possibilities, with no actual flow connecting one moment to the next. This might sound abstract, but it challenges a deeply held assumption. that time exists independently of the things that happen in it. Newton, for instance, believed in something called absolute time, a kind of invisible ticking that continued with perfect regularity, regardless of whether anything in the universe was moving or not. Time, in that view, was the stage on which events occurred. But if Barbara is right, then there's no stage at all, just the scenery, just change, just a vast library of frozen moments, and our minds choosing a thread through them. It's a bit like looking at a flip book. Each page shows a slightly different image, and when you flip through quickly, it comes to life. But what's real? The pages themselves, or the illusion of motion your brain creates between them? This perspective opens up an unsettling possibility that the passage of time, the flow we all feel so intimately, might be an elaborate mental shortcut. A survival tool, perhaps, one that helps us make sense of change and predict what comes next, but doesn't necessarily reflect any deep truth about the nature of reality. And yet that illusion is incredibly convincing. Our memories, emotions, and awareness of mortality all hinge on the idea of time passing. We grow up, grow old, watch seasons turn, candles melt, and waves pull away from the shore. These are not illusions in themselves, they're real changes. But maybe the thread tying them together is the illusion. Not the events, but the sense of movement between them. It's worth asking, if there were no time but things still changed, would anything really be different? Would the universe function any less beautifully, or feel any less alive? Perhaps not. Perhaps time is the melody, and change is the notes. Remove the melody, and the notes remain. But add it in, and suddenly there's music. Long before the world buzzed with digital clocks and satellites, time was measured in shadows. The earliest known timekeeping devices weren't ticking machines but simple sticks in the ground, sundials. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadow would shift, marking the slow passage of the day. It was elegant, natural, and completely dependent on the whims of the weather. No sun, no time. The rhythm was gentle, forgiving. People rose with the light, worked with the seasons, and rested when it grew dark. But the sundial was only the beginning. Humans have always craved order, especially when it comes to the invisible. In ancient Egypt, water clocks were used, bowls with tiny holes that let water drip out at a steady pace, marking time through the slow and silent lowering of the surface. The Chinese developed candle clocks, which burned at a predictable rate, and in medieval Europe, monks rang bells at regular intervals to mark prayer times, keeping their daily rituals aligned with something greater than instinct. Then came the mechanical age. In the 14th century, tower clocks began to appear in European cities. Driven by gears, weights, and escapements, they were often enormous and not especially accurate, but they were a start. Suddenly, people weren't just following the sun, they were hearing hours strike from cathedrals, marking their days in metal and stone. As the centuries turned, timekeeping became more precise. Pocket watches in the 17th century, pendulum clocks that swung with reliable grace, and eventually the quartz clocks of the 20th century. And now, we have atomic clocks, devices that measure time by counting the oscillations of cesium atoms, accurate to within a fraction of a billionth of a second. These clocks are so precise that they lose only about 1 second every 100 million years. If you're wondering why anyone would need a clock that accurate, you're not alone. But precision wasn't just a matter of curiosity, it was necessity. As human society became more complex, we needed better tools to manage it. Accurate timekeeping allowed sailors to navigate the oceans using longitude. Trains could run on shared tracks without colliding. Factories could coordinate shifts. Businesses could open and close predictably, and economies could function on a synchronized pulse. The Industrial Revolution practically ran on time itself, with bells, whistles, and timetables guiding every motion. And yet, as we sliced time into smaller and smaller units, something curious began to happen. The more precisely we measured it, the more rigid and demanding it became. time became less of a soft rhythm and more of a schedule, a structure imposed on every aspect of life. The natural flow of the day was replaced by alarms, appointments, and deadlines. Suddenly, being on time became a moral virtue and being late a small social sin. We began to think in terms of minutes and seconds rather than sunrises and sunsets. A meeting starts at 10 sharp, lunch is an hour, and your train leaves at 5:23. We don't just live in time, we obey it. The clock doesn't just measure our lives, it shapes them. And this raises an interesting question. Does measuring time make it more real, or simply more controlling? When we look at a second hand ticking around a dial, or a digital display counting down the moments, we're seeing change, yes, but we're also seeing an invention. These tools don't capture time itself, they capture movement and pattern. A pendulum swings, a quartz crystal vibrates, an atom pulses. We equate those pulses with time, but are we measuring time or just motion? Think about it this way. If you set your watch to beep every hour, is that sound time or just a reminder of it? Is a tick the passage of time or a symbolic note in a rhythm we've chosen to follow? The ancient Greeks had two words for time. Chronos referred to measured linear time, the kind tracked by clocks and calendars. Kairos, on the other hand, meant something more subjective, the right moment, the opportune time, a pause between breaths, a turning point in a conversation. While Chronos can be chopped into ever smaller slices, Kairos resists measurement altogether. Modern life tends to favour chronos. We fill our days with schedules, timers and countdowns. But in doing so, we may have traded something fluid and rich for something brittle and relentless. Clocks tell us when to begin and when to stop, but they can't tell us how a moment feels. A minute of laughter and a minute of dread tick by at the same pace, but they don't live the same way inside us. It's possible that in mastering time, we've also narrowed it. By dividing the day into 24 hours, 60 minutes each, 60 seconds per minute, we've created a grid to live within. But grids don't leave much room for mystery. The more we standardize time, the more we risk forgetting that it was once a question, not an answer. Still, clocks are beautiful inventions. They hum and tick and glow with human ingenuity. They help us coordinate, connect, and create. They've launched rockets, saved ships, and stitched together continents. But perhaps it's worth remembering that they are tools, not truths. A clock doesn't reveal the nature of time any more than a ruler reveals the nature of space. It just gives us a way to navigate it, or at least to pretend that we can. In the end, dividing time into hours and seconds may have helped us build cities and civilizations, but it may also have helped build the illusion that time is something outside of us, something fixed, exact, and absolute. And that illusion, while useful, might not capture the full picture. Time may still be wild beneath the numbers, slipping between seconds, hiding behind schedules, and waiting patiently for us to notice. Time, as it turns out, is not just something we measure on clocks or observe in the seasons. It's also something we feel, and perhaps nowhere is this more obvious or more confusing than in the human brain. Our perception of time is anything but consistent. It bends, stretches, compresses, and occasionally slips away entirely. One moment can feel like an hour, and an hour can disappear in the blink of an eye. Consider fear. You're walking through a quiet forest when suddenly a branch snaps behind you. Your heart leaps. Time seems to slow. Every sound sharpens. Every movement feels exaggerated. People who've experienced near-death situations often report that time felt like it stopped, or that everything moved in slow motion. But did time really slow down? Or did your brain simply shift gears? In truth, nothing in the external world changed. What shifted was internal, your attention, your awareness, your processing speed. Under stress, the brain floods with adrenaline and switches into high alert. More information is processed per second, and your memory stores those details densely. When you look back on it, the event feels like it took longer, because it's packed with more information than usual. Time didn't slow, you just experienced more of it. Now flip that around. Think about the routine drive to work or school. You arrive and barely remember the journey. The brain, having seen it all before, doesn't bother recording the details. You drift in and out of focus. 10 minutes pass, but it feels like 2. Your mind registers very little change, and so time seems to vanish. These quirks aren't just philosophical curiosities, they're rooted in biology. The human brain doesn't possess a single master clock, but rather a collection of overlapping systems that work together to create a sense of temporal flow. One of the most important is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of about 20,000 neurons nestled in the hypothalamus. This microscopic timekeeper helps regulate circadian rhythms, those roughly 24-hour cycles that tell us when to sleep, eat, and wake. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is sensitive to light and darkness. It communicates with the pineal gland to release melatonin when it gets dark, helping us wind down for rest. This clock is why jet lag happens when we travel across time zones. The body's rhythm falls out of sync with the rising and setting sun, but even in total darkness, the brain maintains an internal rhythm, showing just how deeply wired our sense of time really is. In addition to this daily rhythm, there's another system responsible for what researchers call interval timing, our ability to estimate durations ranging from milliseconds to several minutes. This system is distributed across various brain regions, including the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and frontal cortex. It's what helps you clap in rhythm with music, cook an egg without a timer, or know when to stop talking during a dramatic pause. But interval timing isn't perfectly accurate. It's flexible, emotional, and heavily influenced by context. If you're bored or uncomfortable, time seems to drag. If you're engaged or delighted, it flies. A watched pot really does feel like it never boils, not because it's taking longer, but because your brain is paying too much attention to each passing moment. Interestingly, our perception of time also shifts as we age. Childhood summers felt endless. Waiting for a birthday felt like a lifetime. Now, years vanish like mist. Many psychologists believe this happens because as we get older, we experience fewer novel moments. Novelty stretches time. When the brain encounters something new, it pays closer attention, and the memory of that experience becomes richer, denser. When life becomes routine, the brain uses less energy to encode repeated events, and time seems to compress. This might also explain why travelling to a new place feels longer than returning. On the way there, everything is unfamiliar. Your brain is alert, recording landmarks, sights, smells. But on the way back, the same path feels faster because it's already been mapped and partially filtered out. Your mind has decided it doesn't need to notice it all again. Even in dreams, time can behave strangely. A few minutes of real-world sleep can seem to contain entire hours of dream activity. This suggests that our experience of time isn't tightly tethered to any external flow, but can expand or shrink based on how our brains construct the narrative of an event. Dream researchers have even conducted experiments where lucid dreamers are given a task, like counting to 10, and asked to signal when they've completed it. Most of the time, the duration matches real-world seconds, but not always. Sometimes the dream stretches, sometimes it compresses. It's fluid. These strange phenomena raise a profound question. If our perception of time is this malleable, is time itself an illusion, or just our relationship to it? Perhaps time, in the physical sense, ticks on steadily, governed by the motion of particles and the expansion of the universe. But the version of time that we live through, the kind we feel in our bones and measure in sighs and smiles, might be more sensation than substance. Some neuroscientists suggest that time perception is a byproduct of attention and memory. When we pay attention, we create detailed memories, which makes the moment feel longer in hindsight. When we're distracted or passive, we remember less, and the moment slips by unnoticed. Time, then, might be a cognitive byproduct, an echo of how we process and record experience. Others propose that time perception is closely tied to body awareness, the beat of our hearts, the rhythm of our breath, the firing of neurons, all offer a kind of internal metronome. Meditation practitioners, for example, often report a distorted sense of time during deep focus. When attention narrows and external stimuli fade, the usual flow of time seems to dissolve. Minutes stretch, hours melt. It's not that time stops, it's that our usual way of tracking it becomes unanchored. Without change, without contrast, our sense of temporal flow begins to lose definition. This brings us to an interesting idea. Perhaps time is not a universal constant we pass through, but a kind of experience we generate, a model we build in real time based on movement, memory, attention, and emotion. Like colour or sound, time might be less a property of the world and more a feature of how we interpret it. This doesn't mean time isn't real in some form, but it does suggest that our experience of it is deeply subjective. Two people in the same room can live through the same 10 minutes very differently. One waits anxiously, the other is lost in thought. The same clock ticks on the wall, but the inner world of time unfolds at separate speeds. And if our brains can stretch, squeeze, or even forget time, what does that tell us about its nature? Is time a thread that binds the universe together? Or is it something woven by the mind moment by moment into a tapestry of experience? In the end, time may be both a rhythm of the cosmos and a rhythm of the self, one measured in stars and seconds, the other in memories and moments, one ticking steadily in silence, the other fluttering unpredictably in the chambers of the mind. What exactly is now? It seems obvious at first. You're hearing the sentence now. You're breathing, blinking, maybe lying comfortably in bed while the world gently ticks on. But try to catch that moment, the precise instant of now, and it slips away before you can name it. By the time you've even said the word, the moment has already moved on. The present is gone, replaced by a new one, which is also on its way out the door. It's a little like trying to step into a river and hold on to a single drop of water. The flow doesn't stop just because you noticed it. The idea of a present moment feels intuitive, even essential. It's where life happens, after all, but under the surface it gets slippery. From a scientific point of view, the present might not be as real or fixed as we like to imagine. In fact, the very moment you think you're in, the moment you call now, may be more of a clever illusion than a fundamental feature of the universe. Let's start with your brain. It turns out that your experience of the world is running a little behind real time. Every sight, sound, and touch has to travel through your nervous system, get processed, interpreted, and stitched into a coherent picture. This takes time. Only a few hundred milliseconds, but enough to matter. When you hear a sound, it's already happened. When you see an object, the light reflecting off of it hit your eyes ever so slightly in the past. You are always just a little bit late to your own life, and yet you don't notice. That's the magic trick. Your brain doesn't present the world in a series of lagging updates. It blends the incoming signals into a smooth and unified moment. It backdates your experiences, syncing them into what feels like the present, even though that present is actually a carefully constructed illusion. Neuroscientists call this delay the perceptual lag, and it's usually around 0.2 to 0.3 of a second, just long enough for a good tennis serve to fly right past you. This strange delay raises the question, if our brains are always playing catch-up, is there ever such a thing as being in the present? Or is it more accurate to say we're always living in the very recent past, our minds continuously assembling and updating a version of now that already slipped by? To make sense of this, some researchers introduced the concept of the specious present. This is the very short window of time, usually estimated at a few seconds or less, within which your brain merges sensory information into a single cohesive experience. It's like a mental envelope that holds just enough of the recent past to create the illusion of a continuous moment. the specious present is not a precise point. It's more like a soft-edged span, a brief stretch where your experiences are bundled together and presented as this is happening now. You can feel this intuitively. Think about how you hear music. A melody makes sense only because your brain retains the previous notes as the current ones arrive. If you heard each note in isolation, it would just be a collection of disconnected sounds. Your perception of rhythm, of tempo, of musical flow, all of that lives inside the specious present. Or consider the way a movie works. At 24 frames per second, your brain merges the static images into smooth motion. But at any given instant, what you're seeing isn't just the current frame, it's a blend of recent ones, held together by the brain's remarkable ability to weave a narrative out of fleeting details. That weaving, that stitching of sensations into moments, is where the present lives. Not in the external world, but in your mind. This suggests that now is less like a single point in time and more like a short stretch. A mental horizon over which experience continuously rolls. It's a moving window, always updating, always smoothing out the noise to create a stable world. But that world is not objective. It's tailored to your biology, your brain, your expectations. Even more intriguing, the length of the specious present can vary depending on context. In moments of stress or high alertness, it may seem to expand. Time feels slow because your brain is processing more information within each slice. In calm or repetitive environments, the window may narrow, and time appears to speed up. Your brain, in effect, tunes the size of your now depending on what's going on. This flexible, constructed nature of the present makes it hard to argue that it's a fixed feature of reality. In physics, there's no universal present. Special relativity teaches us that observers moving at different speeds or in different gravitational fields will disagree about whether two events happened at the same time. What's now for you may not be now for someone speeding by in a rocket ship. There's no single objective slice of the universe that everyone experiences as the present. Instead, each observer has their own unique version of now, shaped by motion and position. That undermines the idea that the present is some grand cosmic truth. It seems far more likely that it's a local, personal phenomenon, a side effect of how brains and bodies experience change. Even in our daily lives, we see this play out. You can be physically present in a room but mentally stuck in the past, or anxiously reaching into the future. Meditation, often described as the practice of being in the now, might really be about quieting the mental chatter and simply becoming more aware of the contents of your specious present. But even that awareness is happening just after the fact. The present is always something you're catching up to. And this raises a deeper question. If the present is a mental construction, do we ever truly live in it? Or are we always lagging slightly behind, reflecting, assembling, guessing? If the experience of now is something our brains build, then perhaps there's no universal now, only millions of overlapping private ones, each person's consciousness creating a slightly delayed version of reality, just vivid enough to feel immediate. That doesn't mean the present is meaningless. On the contrary, it might be the most meaningful illusion we have. It's where our choices feel real, where our sensations register, where our thoughts take shape. It's where we believe we are, even if the universe isn't quite so sure. The present may not be a crisp moment suspended in time as we often imagine it. It may not be the thin line dividing past from future. Instead, it may be more like a soft glow, a blending of before and after, stitched together just well enough to keep us grounded. And if we accept that, we might also accept that now is not a destination or a point, but a dance. A rhythm created by the body, the mind, and the world around us. One we feel without fully grasping, one we trust without ever quite touching. Perhaps the present isn't real in the way we think it is, but maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe it's enough that we believe in it, that we feel it, that we find ourselves returning to it again and again, even as it slips silently into memory. Albert Einstein had a curious habit of asking questions that sounded simple, but turned the entire world upside down. One of those questions was, what would it be like to ride alongside a beam of light? That daydream, born in a teenage mind, would eventually lead to a theory that redefined our understanding of time itself. Before Einstein, the universe was thought to run on a sort of invisible cosmic clock. Time was assumed to be absolute, steady, unchanging, and the same for everyone, everywhere. Whether you were lounging in a field or flying on a comet, 1 second was 1 second. It ticked along reliably, like the background beat of reality. Isaac Newton called it absolute time. It was considered a kind of stage upon which all the action of the universe played out calmly and consistently. But Einstein saw things differently. In his theory of special relativity, published in the early 20th century, he introduced a radical idea. Time is not absolute. It does not tick at the same rate for everyone. Instead, time is relative, woven together with space into a single fabric called spacetime, and capable of stretching and contracting depending on how you move through it. Let's say you're on a spaceship moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light. To you, everything inside the ship feels normal. You sip your tea, check your watch, and read a book, all in perfect time. But to someone watching from Earth, your clock would appear to be ticking more slowly. Your heartbeat would slow down, your tea would cool more gradually, and your aging process would stall ever so slightly. Not because you're tired, but because time itself is literally running slower for you compared to someone who stayed behind. This isn't just a quirky idea, it's a measurable, testable phenomenon called time dilation. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time, at least from the perspective of someone who isn't moving with you. It's not science fiction. It's been confirmed with atomic clocks flown on jets and satellites. Even the GPS in your phone has to account for these tiny shifts in time to keep your location accurate. Without Einstein's correction, your phone would misplace you by several kilometers each day. And it gets stranger. Time doesn't just bend under speed, it also bends under gravity. In his general theory of relativity, Einstein showed that massive objects like planets and stars warp the very fabric of space-time around them. This warping causes clocks to tick more slowly in stronger gravitational fields. That means if you live at the bottom of a valley, you're aging slightly more slowly than someone who lives at the top of a mountain. The difference is tiny, just fractions of a second over a lifetime, but it's real. Nowhere is this more extreme than near a black hole. The gravity there is so intense that time almost grinds to a halt. In theory, if you hovered just outside a black hole's event horizon and then returned home, you would find that while only a few hours had passed for you, years, or even centuries, might have gone by for everyone else. You'd step out of your spacecraft into a future you never lived through. In a sense, you'd be a time traveller, just not the kind with a fancy machine and dramatic music. This leads us to one of the most famous thought experiments in modern physics, the twin paradox. Imagine two identical twins. One stays on Earth, while the other boards a spacecraft and travels close to the speed of a light for several years before returning. According to Einstein's theory, the travelling twin would have experienced time more slowly. When they reunite, the twin who stayed on Earth will have aged more than the one who took the cosmic road trip. They were born on the same day, but now they are different ages, not because one of them took better care of their skin, but because time itself moved differently for each of them. This thought experiment is more than just a science classroom favourite. It captures the deeply counterintuitive nature of time in Einstein's universe. It shows us that time doesn't move the same for everyone. It depends on your velocity, your position, and even the mass of the things around you. Time is not a straight, universal line. It's a personal experience, shaped by the path you take through space and the gravity that pulls at you along the way. In practical terms, these effects are tiny in our everyday lives. Walking down the street or flying in a plane won't noticeably affect your aging. But the principles hold true across the cosmos. Astronauts on the International Space Station, orbiting at high speeds and slightly farther from Earth's gravity, do age a fraction of a second less than people on the surface. It's not enough to skip your birthday, but it's there, lurking at the edge of perception. All of this challenges our natural assumption that time flows evenly for everyone. In truth, there's no single now that applies to the entire universe. What feels like the present to one observer might already be the past or the future to another. This means the universe doesn't have a master clock. Instead, every person, every atom, every galaxy experiences its own version of time. It's a deeply unsettling idea in a way. We like to imagine that time is a shared experience, something we all move through together, but relativity tells us that's not quite true. Each of us is riding a personal timeline shaped by our speed and position in the vast fabric of space-time. Your now is not quite my now. The faster we go, the more those differences grow. And yet, despite this complexity, most of the time we live as though time is absolute. We make appointments, celebrate New Year's Eve, and synchronize watches. Our daily lives run on the illusion that time is uniform. But in the background, at the edges of high speeds and strong gravity, time dances to Einstein's tune. A tune that stretches, bends, and sometimes plays at a slightly different tempo depending on where you stand. In a universe like this, time is not a ruler etched into the cosmos. It's more like a fabric, soft and responsive, rippling under the weight of stars and the motion of bodies. It's personal, pliable, and forever surprising. Thanks to Einstein, we now understand that time is not what it seemed, and yet even as it stretches and sways, it remains one of the most powerful forces shaping our experience of the world. Or perhaps, more accurately, shaping our experience through the world. Imagine for a moment that you could peel back the layers of the universe, not just the stars and galaxies, but the space between them, and discover that space and time are not separate at all. That instead of space being out there and time being now, the two are actually stitched together into something deeper and stranger. Space-time. This was one of Einstein's great insights. Before him, people thought of space and time as distinct dimensions. Space was the stage, time was the ticking metronome. But Einstein saw that they are intertwined, forming a four-dimensional fabric where every object, whether it's a planet or a person, is not just moving through space, but also through time. Every second that passes, you're not just standing still. You're moving forward through time, whether you notice it or not. But space-time does something even more peculiar. It changes our understanding of simultaneity. Whether two events happen at the same time. Let's say lightning strikes a tree on your left and another tree on your right at exactly the same moment. You're standing equidistant between them, and you see both flashes simultaneously. In your world, the two strikes happened at the same time. Easy. Now imagine someone is flying past you in a very fast spaceship, zooming from left to right. That person also sees the two lightning strikes, but not at the same time. Because they're moving, light from the strike on the right reaches them before the light from the strike on the left. From their perspective, the right-hand tree was struck first, followed by the left. For them, the two events were not simultaneous at all. Who's correct? The surprising answer, both are. In the realm of relativity, simultaneity is relative. What you perceive as at the same time depends entirely on your motion. If you're standing still, you see things one way. If you're moving quickly, you see them another way. The order of events is not carved into the universe. It depends on your perspective. This isn't just about seeing things at different times because light takes time to travel. That part we can account for. This is deeper. It's about how time itself behaves depending on your motion. Einstein showed that no observer's view of time is more correct than another's. There's no universal clock ticking away behind the scenes, keeping track of what happens when. The universe doesn't agree on what now means. It's a bit unsettling, especially if you're used to thinking of time as absolute. We like to imagine a single shared reality where events happen in a neat, agreed-upon sequence. First the tea is poured, then the biscuit is dunked. Then the biscuit collapses in a soggy mess. But in Einstein's universe, even the order of those events might depend on how fast you're moving. This raises a tricky question. If simultaneity is relative, can there really be a single, objective timeline? Is there such a thing as a shared now that everyone, everywhere can agree on? The answer appears to be no, at least not in any meaningful way. In our daily lives, these differences are too small to notice. Whether you're walking down the street or sitting on a train, your version of now is practically the same as everyone else's. The speeds are too low, the distance is too short. But when you start approaching the speed of light, or dealing with objects separated by astronomical distances, the idea of simultaneity begins to unravel. Two astronauts moving in opposite directions might disagree on whether a star exploded before or after a distant comet passed a planet. Each of them has their own timeline, valid, consistent, but incompatible with the others, and the universe doesn't pick sides. It allows both timelines to coexist. This makes spacetime feel less like a stage and more like a vast quilt, stitched together from countless overlapping patches. Each observer carries their own patch, their own thread of experience, and those threads don't always line up in the way we'd expect. You might wonder then how anything functions at all. If everyone has their own version of now, how do we keep reality consistent? The answer lies in causality. Even though simultaneity is relative, the cause and effect relationship between events remains intact. If you press a button and a light turns on, that order holds for everyone, regardless of their motion. Cause must precede effect for all observers. That's the rule the universe refuses to bend. But beyond that, all bets are off. The further apart two events are in space, the more room there is for disagreement about their timing. In fact, for certain pairs of events, it's physically impossible to say which came first without first picking a reference frame. It's like asking which city is more north, Tokyo or San Francisco. The answer depends on how you tilt the map. This lack of a universal now has deep philosophical implications. It suggests that the present isn't some absolute slice of time sweeping across the cosmos like a giant windshield wiper. There is no cosmic metronome striking the same beat for every corner of the universe. The idea of a single present moment shared by all things is a useful fiction, good for conversations and calendars, but not grounded in physics. Instead, each observer carves their own path through space-time, bringing with them their own version of what events are happening simultaneously. The present becomes a personal experience, not a cosmic constant, which makes time feel less like a river we all float along together, and more like a mosaic of perspectives, each with its own rhythm. This doesn't mean we're trapped in solipsism, each living in a completely separate universe. It just means that time is more flexible, more nuanced than our everyday experience suggests. What feels like one unified reality is really a carefully coordinated dance of clocks, all ticking to their own beat, all stitched into the same mysterious fabric. It also challenges our emotional relationship with time. We talk about living in the moment or being present, but physics tells us there may be no such thing as the present. There are just countless little presents scattered across space, overlapping like ripples on a pond. Your now, my now, the now of a satellite orbiting Jupiter, each one real in its own frame, and yet disconnected from the others. This makes the universe a bit less like a novel with pages turning together, and more like a vast mural that you view one patch at a time. You never see the whole thing all at once, and even if you could, someone else might see it arranged completely differently. It's strange, it's beautiful, it's not what we expected, and maybe in the end that's what time truly is. Not a single thread pulling us forward, but a tangle of possibilities, perspectives, and pulses. Each one humming along its own trajectory, singing its own version of now. There's something curious about the way we experience time, not just that it flows, but that it flows in one direction. We remember the past, but not the future. We age forward, not backward. Eggs crack, but they don't uncrack. A drop of ink spreads in water but never reassembles into a tidy blob. Time, it seems, has an arrow, and that arrow points from what was toward what will be. But why? When we look closely at the laws of physics, the rules that govern particles, forces, motion, we find something surprising. Most of them don't actually care about the direction of time. If you film two particles bouncing off each other and then play the footage in reverse, the motion still looks completely plausible. The math checks out both ways. The equations that describe gravity, electromagnetism, and even the quantum world are time symmetric. They work just as well backward as they do forward, and yet the universe clearly behaves as if time has a preferred direction. We call this the arrow of time. But if the underlying laws don't demand it, where does that arrow come from? One answer lies in the realm of thermodynamics, the study of heat, energy, and the behavior of large systems. In particular, it lies with a concept called entropy. Entropy is often described as a measure of disorder. It's a way of quantifying how mixed up or random a system is. A neat stack of playing cards has low entropy. A shuffled deck has higher entropy. A child's toy room after a birthday party, maximum entropy. The second law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, entropy tends to increase over time. Things move from order to disorder, from structure to chaos. A hot cup of tea cools down, not the other way round. A sandcastle crumbles, not spontaneously rebuilds itself. This tendency gives time a direction, not because anything is pushing it, but because there are far more ways for things to be disordered than ordered. Imagine you drop a glass on the floor, it shatters. That's a high entropy outcome. There are countless ways the shards can scatter, but only one tidy, unbroken glass. The odds overwhelmingly favour disorder. That's why we don't see shattered glasses leaping back together. It's not impossible according to the laws of motion. It's just extraordinarily unlikely. So, the arrow of time might arise from probability, from the fact that statistically, things move toward greater entropy simply because there are more disordered states available. It's not about force or necessity, it's about likelihood. This statistical view is powerful, but it raises another puzzle. If the laws of physics are time symmetric, and entropy increases toward the future, then why isn't it increasing toward the past as well? What makes the past the low entropy end of the timeline? That's where things get tricky. According to most interpretations, the universe must have started in a very special low entropy state. The Big Bang wasn't just a burst of matter and energy, it was also an incredibly organized beginning. And that order gave time its arrow. The expanding universe, cooling and growing more complex, is essentially a long journey from that cosmic neatness toward a messier, more entropic future. But that leads to another question. Why was the universe so ordered to begin with? That, as it turns out, is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in cosmology. Some physicists suggest that the structure of space-time itself required such a beginning. Others think that what we perceive as low entropy may actually be the natural default state of the early universe. And some believe we may need a deeper theory, one that explains not just how time flows but why it exists at all. Still, for us, the arrow of time is undeniable. It's written into our biology. We grow, we age, we remember. Our minds are constantly updating, drawing from the past to imagine the future. Memory, in particular, gives time its emotional weight. We recall what has happened and use it to predict what might. But we can't flip it. We can't remember what hasn't occurred. This asymmetry gives rise to the idea that the arrow of time might be partly psychological, that it's not just the universe evolving from order to chaos, but also our minds choosing to interpret it that way. Perhaps entropy increases both ways from some central moment, and we just happen to be on one side of that peak. Perhaps memory only works in the direction that entropy increases. In that view, time's arrow could be more about the structure of cognition than the structure of the cosmos. There are also alternative theories. Some physicists have proposed that on the larger scales, time might not even be fundamental, that the universe at its core is timeless, and what we perceive as the passage of time is an emergent property, something that only arises when you have complex systems like brains observing other complex systems. Others imagine a multiverse where different regions of space might experience time differently, or not at all. In such models, the arrow of time could be local, not global, a feature of our particular cosmic neighbourhood, not a universal law. And then there's the idea of the past hypothesis, which suggests that the arrow of time is simply a brute fact. The universe started in a low entropy state, and that's all there is to it. No further explanation needed. It just did. These are difficult ideas, and none of them fully close the case. What's fascinating, though, is how much of our daily experience hinges on this arrow. Without it, there'd be no causality, no memory, no narrative. You couldn't pour coffee, tie your shoes, or watch a sunset fade. Time would become a jumble, with no before or after, no consequence, no story. And perhaps that's what we really mean when we talk about the arrow of time, not just the direction entropy flows, but the direction meaning flows, forward, from cause to effect, from question to answer, from wonder to understanding. So even if time itself is not fundamental, if it's a byproduct of deeper processes or just one way to interpret change, the arrow we feel is deeply real to us. It marks the flow of our lives, the path from what was to what might be. Whether written by thermodynamics or woven by memory, it's the compass we carry through the fog. And as long as it points forward, we follow it, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, moment by moment, through the beautiful, irreversible unfolding of our little corner of the universe. We're used to thinking of time as something that passes. The past slips behind us, the future lies ahead, and we ride the wave of the present like a surfer balancing between memory and possibility. But what if that's not how the universe actually works? What if the past hasn't vanished and the future hasn't yet arrived? Because in a very real sense, they're both still out there. Enter the block universe. The block universe theory, also called eternalism, is the idea that time doesn't really flow at all. Instead, every moment in time exists simultaneously, just like every point in space. The past, present, and future are all equally real. We don't see them all at once, of course, just like you can't see the whole Earth from where you're standing. But that doesn't mean they aren't there. Imagine time as a map, not a timeline with a moving dot called now, but a full detailed atlas of every moment that ever was or ever will be. Just as every city exists on a map, whether or not you're currently visiting it, every moment in time exists in the block universe, whether or not you're currently experiencing it. Your birth, your first bicycle ride, your last cup of tea, they're all still there, marked on the grand coordinate system of space-time. This is a strange and slightly unsettling idea. It tells us that the past isn't gone, it's just elsewhere. Not in reach, perhaps, but still real, still part of the fabric. When you remember something, you're not conjuring a ghost. You're peeking back into another region of the block, one your consciousness has already passed through. The future, by the same token, isn't an empty page waiting to be written. It's already there, waiting its turn. You just haven't arrived yet. Or, depending on your point of view, you're already there. You just aren't aware of it. This idea gained support from Einstein's theory of relativity. In relativity, there's no absolute now. What counts as simultaneous depends on your frame of reference, your speed and location in the universe. Two people moving differently might disagree on whether two events happened at the same time. That suggests there is no universal present moment, no single slice of time shared by all observers. And if there's no universal now, then past and future must be just as real as what we're experiencing in this moment. This leads to a rather poetic image. Reality is a frozen four-dimensional sculpture. Space and time aren't separate. They're fused into one seamless entity called space-time. You don't live only in the present. You're extended across time. Your life isn't a moving dot. It's a long, continuous thread stretched from birth to death, like a glowing strand woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Every breath you've taken, every step you've walked, every dream you've had, they're all part of this thread, all present in the block. But if the past is still there, why can't we revisit it? Why can't we travel through time the way we travel through space? One answer is that we're not built to do it. Our consciousness seems to move in one direction, forward. Our brains are wired to process information in a sequential cause and effect manner. We store memories of the past, not the future. We make decisions based on what's behind us, not what lies ahead. Whether time really flows or not, our experience of it does. Another possibility is that while all points in space-time exist, the laws of physics only allow for information to travel in certain ways. You can't just hop from one moment to another, because the rules of causality, what causes what, still apply. The past might be there, but it's fenced off from interaction, like a painting behind glass. Still, the implications are staggering. If the block universe is right, then every moment of your life is preserved in the cosmic structure. Nothing is truly lost. Your happiest day, your hardest trial, that perfect hour where everything felt just right, they all still are. Not in memory, not in imagination, but as actual coordinates in space-time. Your past self is still sitting under that tree, reading that book, smiling at that friend. It's not just a fading echo. It's a permanent feature of reality. Some philosophers and physicists embrace this view with a kind of quiet awe. If time doesn't truly flow, if it's our minds that give it motion, then we are not so much passengers on a train as we are the train itself. We contain all our moments. We're all our moments. There's even an odd comfort in this. If the block universe is real, then goodbyes are never final. The people you've lost aren't gone. They're just in another part of the block, another corner of space-time. The time you spent with them still exists, it's just not now. Of course, this model isn't universally accepted. Not everyone is ready to trade the flow of time for a frozen sculpture. Some argue that while the block universe makes sense mathematically, it doesn't explain our strong sense of the passage of time. Others propose that the flow of time is a fundamental aspect of reality, not just an illusion of consciousness. They argue for models where time is dynamic, where the present does have a special status and the future remains open, not predetermined. Still, even critics acknowledge the strange consistency of the block universe with what we observe. It doesn't break any rules, it doesn't defy logic, it just challenges how we like to imagine ourselves moving through life. In this view, memory becomes less like a photograph and more like a window. When you remember, you're not simply reconstructing the past. You're glancing into a part of space-time where you've already been. Nostalgia, déjà vu, even dreams might be mental echoes of this deeper connection to your full trajectory through the block. Perhaps then the past never left. Perhaps we're not leaving the past behind, but constantly emerging from it, like footprints rising into the air behind a walker who doesn't realize they're suspended above their entire journey. The block universe invites us to see time not as a fleeting stream, but as an immense shimmering tapestry, one that stretches from the first moment to the last, every thread interwoven with care. And while we may only see one stitch at a time, the full picture, the complete story, is already there. Whether that brings you a sense of peace or a sense of strangeness, it's hard to deny how beautiful the idea is, that we are not just fleeting sparks in a moving current, but entire constellations of experience, fixed, glowing, and quietly eternal in the fabric of time. The future has always been a source of wonder, anxiety, and hope. We imagine it constantly. What's for dinner? Where we'll be in 10 years? Whether the sun will rise tomorrow? The future feels open, unwritten, shaped by the choices we make. But what if that feeling is an illusion? What if the future isn't waiting to be created, but is already out there, as real and unchangeable as the past? This is the unsettling suggestion of a view called eternalism. In eternalism, all points in time, past, present and future, exist equally. They're not unfolding, they're not forming as we speak. They're already there. Every moment that has ever occurred or will ever occur is sitting quietly on the grand timeline of the universe, fixed in place. You're not writing your story one page at a time. You're reading a book that's already been published. This isn't just a philosophical daydream. It finds support in the physics of space-time, particularly in Einstein's theory of relativity. In special relativity, there's no single universal now. Time depends on the observer's motion. Two people moving differently may disagree on whether two events happened at the same time. That lack of a universal present means there's no privileged moment of what's happening now. All moments are equally valid depending on your perspective. And if all moments are valid, then none of them can claim to be more real than the others. In other words, the past hasn't disappeared, and the future hasn't yet come into being. They're both just elsewhere in space-time. This is where the idea of the block universe enters. Think of the universe not as a movie playing in real time, but as a reel of film. The entire story, beginning, middle and end, already exists. Each frame is static, complete. What we call the present is simply the frame we're currently experiencing. From this viewpoint, the future already exists. It's not a cloud of probabilities, not a waiting room of potential outcomes. It's already part of the structure. Now this clashes pretty directly with the way we feel about our lives. We plan, we hope, we regret. We believe we can make decisions that matter. But if the future is already written, what does that mean for free will? Are we just passengers on a ride that's already been mapped out? Before we spiral too far into existential dread, let's take a step back. Eternalism is only one interpretation. There are other ways of viewing time that preserve the feeling of openness. Presentism, for instance, holds that only the present exists. The past is gone, and the future is not yet real. The world is constantly becoming, and what exists right now is all there is. This view fits more naturally with our everyday experience. It preserves the sense that the future is open and the past is closed, but it struggles to mesh with the physics of relativity, which shows that now is a slippery concept, changing depending on your frame of reference. Then there's the growing block theory, a kind of compromise. In this model, the past and present are real, but the future isn't. The universe is like a book being written page by page. Everything that has happened is etched into the block, but the future is still blank. New events are constantly added to the structure as they occur, expanding the block over time. Growing block theory allows for the future to be open, while still treating the past as a permanent part of reality. It keeps the universe grounded in something fixed, while leaving room for change. But like presentism, it doesn't sit comfortably with relativity, which treats time as a dimension much like space, something that doesn't grow, but simply is. So we're left with a paradox. The physics suggests a block universe where all times exist equally. But our experience screams otherwise. We feel ourselves moving forward. We feel ourselves choosing. We feel uncertain about what's coming. This brings us to the heart of the debate. Is free will compatible with a predetermined future? One way to reconcile the two is through the concept of compatibilism. This view argues that even if the future is fixed, our actions still matter. Why? Because those actions are part of the block. Your decision to take a walk, call a friend, or change careers is embedded in the future, not despite your free will, but because of it. The future exists as it does because you will make those choices. You're not being controlled by the block. You're the block in motion. In this sense, free will doesn't vanish just because the outcome is fixed. It's like reading a novel for the second time. You already know how it ends, but that doesn't mean the characters didn't make choices along the way. Their decisions are baked into the structure of the story. If the universe is a book, then our free will is written into the pages. Others are less comfortable with this. They argue that if the future is already real, then no amount of decision-making can change it. that everything we do is merely unfolding according to a script we can't see, that we are, in essence, acting out a role that's already been assigned. For some, this feels deeply limiting. But maybe the problem lies in the way we think about time and change. If all of space-time is laid out, then our experience of moving through it, our sense of flow and novelty, is part of the structure. It's not an illusion. It's simply the way consciousness interacts with the block. Just as a traveller moves along a road they didn't build, we move through time along a path we didn't create. But the journey still feels real, and the scenery still unfolds as we pass by. Even in an eternalist framework, uncertainty is real for the observer. You don't know the future until you get there. And in that sense, your choices matter, not because they change the block, but because they're the reason the block is the way it is. You are both explorer and landscape, both author and character. It's also worth noting that not all physicists or philosophers are committed to eternalism. Some argue that time might be an emergent property, something that only appears at large scales or in the presence of consciousness. Others believe that a deeper theory of quantum gravity might replace time altogether, suggesting that what we experience as past and future are merely side effects of a more fundamental, timeless reality. Still, the idea that the future already exists has a strange, quiet beauty to it. It suggests that nothing is ever really lost, that every smile, every goodbye, every fleeting moment is still out there, perfectly preserved in the geometry of space-time. It may not be accessible, but it's there, eternal, like the stars. Whether that's comforting or unsettling depends on your perspective. Maybe we don't need to know whether the future is fixed to appreciate the richness of the present. Maybe we don't need to tear the page out of the book to savour the story. And maybe, just maybe, fate and freedom aren't opposites after all. Maybe the path you walk and the way you choose to walk it are both part of the same mysterious design. A design that doesn't rob you of meaning but offers it, written in the ink of time, unfolding one breath at a time. If you couldn't remember a single moment ago, would time still exist for you? It's a strange question because time feels so constant, so baked into everything we do. We wake up, go about our day, and drift into sleep. The sun rises and sets, meals are cooked and eaten, stories unfold. But all of that relies in some essential way on memory. Without it, we might still be in time, but would we feel it? Memory gives time texture. It connects the dots. Without memory, moments become islands with no bridges, no way to tell which came before, or even if there was a before. You could live in an endless string of present moments and never know it. Our sense of self is built almost entirely on memory. You are, in large part, the story you remember about yourself, where you were born, what you've done, who you've loved, what you've learned. Memory lets us thread together countless little fragments into something cohesive. It gives the illusion, perhaps the reality, of continuity, of being one person through the river of change. But remove that memory and something collapses. You're still there, breathing, blinking, sensing. But who are you? Where are you in time? People with certain kinds of brain injury experience this firsthand. One of the most famous cases is that of Clive Waring, a gifted British musician who lost the ability to form new memories after a viral infection damaged his brain. He can remember how to play the piano beautifully, but his short-term memory resets every few seconds. Each moment feels like waking up. He constantly believes it's the first time he's become conscious since falling ill, even though decades have passed. He exists in a world where time is fragmented, choppy, endlessly restarting. Another condition, anterograde amnesia, similarly disrupts the ability to form new memories. People with this disorder can remember events from before the injury, but they struggle to record anything after. Their past is intact, but their future remains forever blank. Days become moments, conversations reset. Life becomes a loop without a timeline. For these individuals, the mechanics of time, clocks ticking, days changing, still unfold, but their personal experience of time is radically altered. It's a kind of eternal present, a moment divorced from continuity. It suggests that time as we feel it isn't just something out there in the world, it's something built inside us. This leads to an intriguing possibility, that memory doesn't just record time, it creates our experience of it. After all, how do you know that 5 minutes have passed, or that yesterday even existed? You know because you remember. Time feels real because you've constructed a sequence. One thing leading to another, a before and an after. Memory strings moments into a story. Without it, we're left with moments in isolation, like pages of a book scattered on the floor with no numbers. Even your sense of how long something lasted is based on how much detail your brain recorded. A new experience, say, travelling to a country you've never been to, feels long and rich in hindsight. But sitting through a routine meeting might vanish from your mental timeline almost instantly. Your brain compressed it, marked it as unimportant. The more vivid the memory, the longer the moment seems to have lasted. In that sense, memory doesn't just record time, it stretches and squeezes it. There's even some evidence that we use memory to imagine the future. When we think ahead, we don't pull data from a separate system. We repurpose the same neural machinery we use for remembering. The hippocampus, a part of the brain heavily involved in memory, also lights up when we try to picture what might happen next week or next year. In other words, we simulate the future by remixing the past. This blending of memory and imagination suggests that time isn't a straight road we walk. It's more like a collage we constantly rearrange. We're not just moving through time, we're constructing it as we go, using memory as our toolkit. But does that mean time isn't real? Only our version of it? Not necessarily. The outside world still hums along. The Earth spins, particles decay, galaxies drift. Those processes continue regardless of whether anyone remembers them. But experienced time, the kind we live and feel, is inseparable from memory. Without it, time loses its thread. It becomes a blur, or worse, a void. This isn't just a human phenomenon. Animals with memory likely experience time too. A dog waiting at the door for its owner, a bird migrating across the globe, a squirrel remembering where it buried its food. These behaviours suggest some sense of continuity. Not the kind of time marked by atomic clocks, but the lived time of expectations and outcomes. Even artificial systems like certain types of AI build temporal models based on past data. They remember patterns and use those memories to predict what might come next. While not conscious, these systems still mimic one of time's key functions, making sense of change through stored experience. This raises the question, are we revealing time through memory, like dusting off a painting? Or are we creating it, like painting in reverse, starting from the brushstroke and imagining the canvas? Some philosophers lean toward the latter. They suggest that time as we know it doesn't exist independently, at least not in the form we experience. It's a framework imposed by our minds to navigate a world that is constantly shifting. Memory is the glue that holds that framework together. Without it, we'd have no direction, no story, no self. Others argue that memory is simply our way of tracking something real. That time is out there, ticking away, and our brains have evolved clever ways to keep up. Memory, in this view, is like a compass, not creating the map but helping us read it. Both views are compelling, and both may be true in different ways. Time might be a physical dimension and a psychological experience, intertwined but not identical. What we feel as time may be a kind of mental scaffolding built from moments we've stored. Without that scaffolding, the vast landscape of our lives would collapse into a featureless plain. In that light, memory becomes more than a tool. It becomes a form of time travel. When you remember something vividly, you're not just recalling data, you're revisiting a moment. You feel the sun on your face again, hear the laughter, taste the sweetness of the cake. For a brief second, the present bends and the past reaches forward. That's a kind of magic. And it reminds us that time, for all its mystery, is not just measured in seconds or minutes, it's measured in meaning, in how we hold our experiences and how they hold us. So if you've ever wondered where time goes, maybe the better question is, where do we keep it? The answer, quietly and faithfully, is in memory. Time in our everyday lives seems like the most basic ingredient of existence. It ticks forward. It separates cause from effect. It keeps everything from happening all at once. And in physics, time is part of the foundational machinery. Equations describe how things change over time, whether it's a falling apple, a spinning planet, or a car accelerating down the highway. Time is right there in the math, running like a thread through every motion. But then you zoom in, really far in, down to the smaller scales of nature, the realm of quantum mechanics, and something unexpected begins to happen. Time, which once seemed so essential, starts to wobble. It loses its familiar shape. And in some theories, it vanishes altogether. Welcome to the quantum problem of time. At the quantum level, particles don't behave like tiny marbles bouncing around in space. Instead, they exist as probabilities, waves of possibility, only becoming definite when observed. They can tunnel through walls, exist in multiple states at once, and influence each other instantly across vast distances. All of this is strange enough. But when physicists try to combine quantum mechanics with general relativity, the theory that describes gravity and space-time, things get even weirder. One of the big challenges in modern physics is uniting these two great theories into a single framework called quantum gravity. General relativity treats time as flexible and dynamic, bending and stretching near massive objects. Quantum mechanics, by contrast, treats time as a fixed background parameter. The equations run along a timeline like film through a projector. You can calculate how a particle's state evolves in time, but not what creates time in the first place. That mismatch becomes a serious problem when trying to describe the universe as a whole, especially at the very beginning during the Big Bang, where quantum effects and gravitational effects were both enormous. Enter the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. This equation is one proposed attempt to describe quantum gravity. It's meant to be the quantum version of the equation Einstein gave us for gravity, a way to capture how the universe evolves at the tinier scales. But when physicists first wrote it down, they noticed something shocking. There was no time, not metaphorically, literally. Time as a variable didn't appear in the equation at all. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation describes a universe in a kind of eternal stillness. It gives you a wave function of the universe, not how it changes, but how it is. This is deeply unsettling. How can a theory of the universe not include time? How can physics work without something changing? Some interpretations suggest that time may be emergent, not fundamental, but a product of relationships between things. Think of a clock. It doesn't contain time. It just counts oscillations, repetitive changes, against some standard. The motion of the hands creates our sense of time, but the clock itself doesn't make time happen. In the same way, the universe might not require time to exist. Instead, time could arise from patterns, from correlations between systems. In this view, the universe isn't ticking along like a stopwatch. It simply is in all its configurations. Time is the story we tell when we look at how parts of the universe relate to each other. It's a bit like flipping through the pages of a flipbook. The book contains no motion, just still images. But when you move through them at the right pace, your brain creates a moving picture. The illusion of animation, the illusion of flow. What if our experience of time is something similar? A kind of psychological animation stitched together from a series of timeless quantum states. This idea leads to what some physicists call the timeless view of the universe. In this view, change is real, but time, as a flowing dimension, is not. It's just a label we put on the differences between states. If you rearrange a Rubik's Cube, you see a progression, but the cube doesn't need to know what time is. The order of the changes is enough, and yet, we feel time. We measure it. We age. The planets orbit. Radioactive atoms decay. How can all of that exist if the underlying physics has no timeline? One proposal is that time is internal to the system. That is, within a closed system like the universe, one part of the system can act as a clock for the rest. Suppose you're watching an hourglass. The sand falling becomes your measure of time, but the hourglass doesn't care about time. It just follows the rules of physics. The sequence of configurations, the shifting piles of sand, becomes time to you. You perceive time not because the system has a built-in clock, but because change creates a reference. So perhaps the reason time disappears from the fundamental equations is that it's not a basic ingredient at all. It's not part of the universe's deepest foundations. It's a pattern we extract from the way things relate. A kind of bookkeeping that only becomes necessary when you have an observer looking at the system. This would also help explain why time seems to run only one way in our experience, why we remember the past but not the future, why causes precede effects. These features might emerge from the particular structure of our universe, especially from the growth of entropy and the complexity of interacting systems. The direction of time, in this view, is a large-scale phenomenon, a result of the universe unfolding in specific ways, not a built-in arrow pointing forward. But there's still a mystery here. If time isn't fundamental, then what is? What is the universe really made of, if not particles moving through space and time? Some approaches to quantum gravity, like loop quantum gravity or string theory, suggest that space and time might both be emergent, arising from deeper, more abstract entities. These might be networks of relationships, quantum loops, vibrating strings, or something else entirely. In these models, time could be a secondary feature, something that shows up when many small interactions coalesce into a familiar structure. Imagine zooming out from a forest. Up close, you see individual leaves and branches, but from far away, you just see green. Time might be like that, something that only appears when we take a broad view of many interactions. At the quantum level, the leaf and the tree vanish, and only the mathematical relationships remain. So are we misunderstanding time's role in reality? It's possible. We evolved as creatures that survive by noticing sequences, by remembering patterns, by predicting what comes next. Our brains crave causality, direction, and flow. But nature may not care about those things. The universe may be less a ticking clock and more a vast interconnected structure, a cathedral of configurations frozen in the strange stillness of its own existence. And if time is not real in the way we think it is, then perhaps our journey through it is less emotion and more a melody, an unfolding harmony of changing notes, heard one after another, even though the whole song already exists. That doesn't make time less beautiful. It might make it more so, because if time is just the way we listen to the universe, then every moment is a note in a cosmic symphony we're lucky enough to hear, measure, and remember, even if it was never truly ticking to begin with. Imagine a universe with nothing in it. No planets, no stars, no atoms, no clocks ticking, no rivers flowing, no hands to clap or hearts to beat. Just emptiness. A pure, featureless void. Would time still pass in such a place? It's a deceptively simple question, one that touches on some of the deepest disagreements in the history of physics and philosophy. At first glance, it seems obvious that time would still be there, ticking away in the background even if nothing was around to notice. But on closer inspection, the question becomes foggy. What exactly is time, if not the measure of change? And if absolutely nothing changes, does the concept of time make any sense at all? This was a major point of contention between two intellectual giants of the 17th century, Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Newton believed in what's called absolute time, a kind of cosmic metronome that ticks away independently of anything happening in the universe. In Newton's view, time is like a blank sheet of paper on which events are drawn. Whether or not anything is actually happening on the page, the sheet exists. Time flows relentlessly and uniformly regardless of whether anything moves. But Leibniz disagreed. He argued for relational time, the idea that time doesn't exist independently, but is instead defined by relationships between events. If nothing changes, there is no time. You need at least something, some kind of motion, some kind of comparison, to say that time has passed. Without events, time is an empty concept, like asking how loud a soundless bell is. Let's return to that empty universe. Picture it again. Pure blackness. No particles, no fields, not even a stray photon zipping through the void. If you were somehow placed inside this universe, though that's a paradox in itself, you'd have no way to tell whether one moment differed from the next. There'd be no heartbeat to count, no breath to take, no orbiting moon to measure. No before and after, just sameness. In such a place, could you honestly say that time is passing? Our everyday experience says yes. We've grown up in a world full of ticking clocks and rising suns. Time is so woven into our perception that we imagine it must persist even in silence. But that's because we never experience a reality without change. Even when things seem still, there's motion, air particles buzzing, atoms vibrating, thoughts unfolding. Take all that away, and time might not just slow, it might evaporate. This idea leads to a curious possibility, that time, far from being a backdrop, might actually depend on matter and motion to exist in any meaningful way. And it's not just philosophy students who worry about this. In physics, time is intimately tied to measurement. To detect time, you need a process, something that ticks or changes. That's why we build clocks. A pendulum swings, a quartz crystal vibrates, a cesium atom oscillates. These movements give us regular markers to measure time against. Strip away all matter, and those processes vanish. No pendulums, no crystals, no oscillations. Without change, there's nothing to measure. You'd be left with the idea of time, but no practical or conceptual way to demonstrate it. It's a bit like asking how long a movie lasts if you never press play. The reel may be coiled up and ready, but without motion, the concept of length doesn't apply in any lived sense. You need unfolding, one frame after another, for time to take shape. Of course, some would argue that even in a perfectly still universe, time would still exist in some mathematical sense. You could say, hypothetically, that from second 1 to second 2, nothing happened, and from second 2 to second 3, still nothing. But this quickly becomes a word game. If there's no event to mark the passage of a second, is it meaningful to say the second occurred? This touches on another subtle issue, the difference between coordinate time and physical time. Coordinate time is the abstract mathematical variable used in equations, something you can plug into a formula to calculate motion. Physical time, by contrast, is the stuff we actually experience, the felt passage of moments. Coordinate time might exist on paper, but without matter to interact with, physical time might be indistinguishable from a deep eternal pause. There's a similar tension in general relativity. Einstein's equations describe how space-time bends and flexes in response to mass and energy. In an empty universe, those equations simplify dramatically. No curvature, no dynamics. Space-time becomes flat and featureless. It still exists mathematically, but whether it has any physical meaning is another matter. Time in this empty space-time has no reference points. It stretches on, perhaps infinitely, but without clocks, without events, there's no way to say what it's doing. Some physicists speculate that time, like space, may be emergent. That is, it might not be a basic ingredient of the universe, but something that arises when enough complexity appears. Like temperature, which doesn't make sense at the level of a single particle, but becomes meaningful when you have trillions of atoms jostling together. Time, in this view, might be a macroscopic property, a feature that only appears when there are relationships, interactions, and information flow. And that means that in an empty universe, time wouldn't just be unmeasurable, it might not exist at all. Of course, that's a deeply counterintuitive idea. It suggests that time isn't something the universe has, it's something the universe does. And if the universe stops doing anything, no movement, no change, then time stops too. Or perhaps more accurately, it never starts. This might seem bleak, but it's also oddly elegant. It ties time to the dance of matter and energy, to the unfolding of events. Without dancers, there's no dance. Without motion, no time. The universe becomes a blank canvas, not one waiting to be painted, but one that doesn't even know what painting is. In a way, that elevates the role of things in the cosmos. Every atom, every photon, every swirl of a galaxy becomes not just a resident of time, but a creator of it. Change is what makes time real. And in that sense, time is less like the stage and more like the music, impossible without instruments and silent without motion. So in a completely empty universe, would time exist? Perhaps not. Without anything to change, without any way to detect the passage of moments, time may be nothing more than an unlit candle, present only in theory, not in flame. And maybe that tells us something profound about our own universe. That time is not a thing we float through, but a living pattern we help generate. Every second we move, think, breathe and change. There are moments in life when time seems to vanish, not slow down, not speed up, but simply fall away. Ask a monk deep in meditation, a mystic lost in prayer, or even a musician fully absorbed in their performance, and you may hear the same phrase whispered softly. There was no time, only now. This feeling of timelessness isn't just poetic, it's surprisingly common. Across centuries and cultures, people have described experiences where the normal ticking of moments seems to fade, replaced by a vast, still sense of presence. It might be called the eternal now, timeless awareness, or pure being, but it points to the same thing, a state in which the usual flow of past to future melts into something quieter, deeper, and profoundly strange. But what exactly is happening when time disappears from conscious experience? Let's start with meditation. In its many forms, Buddhist mindfulness, yogic breathing, transcendental repetition, meditation trains the mind to pay attention differently. Instead of scanning the horizon for what's next, or ruminating on what just happened, meditation anchors attention in the present. You're not solving problems or planning dinner, you're just observing breath, body, thought, whatever's happening now. And after enough practice, something curious can happen. Time loosens. You stop counting seconds. You stop anticipating. In fact, you stop measuring anything at all. Thoughts slow or cease, and what's left is a sense of spaciousness, a moment that stretches open but without any edges. Some practitioners describe it as stepping outside of time entirely. The breath still moves, sounds still arrive, but there's no rush, no sequence, no push forward, just stillness. To a brain trained to think in clocks and calendars, this sounds like a kind of mental magic. But there's science behind the sensation. Studies using brain imaging have shown that during deep meditation, activity in certain regions of the brain decreases, particularly in areas linked to self-awareness and time perception. The posterior cingulate cortex and parts of the default mode network, which normally help you track your internal state and the passing of time, begin to quiet down. Meanwhile, areas associated with sensory awareness and present moment focus light up. This shift in neural activity may explain why time seems to fade. With the usual mental machinery offline, no checking the clock, no mental timeline, no storytelling, the mind slips out of sequence. It doesn't stop functioning, but it stops narrating, and with no narrative there's no timeline to follow, just pure awareness. This state isn't unique to formal meditation. It can arise in moments of awe or flow, watching a sunset, swimming beneath stars, standing atop a mountain in perfect silence. Time, normally the background hum of life, goes silent. You don't know how long you've been standing there, You don't care. There's only this. From a neuroscientific perspective, this may be the result of reduced temporal binding. Our brains are constantly stitching together sensory input into a coherent story. What happened first? What came next? But when the pace slows, or the inputs become too minimal or repetitive, this binding process breaks down. The brain stops organizing time into a neat sequence and instead floats in an undefined moment. This brings us to the question, if your brain doesn't track time, does time still exist for you? In a practical sense, no. Without internal markers like thoughts, changes in environment or emotional cues, the brain has no reference for how much time has passed. That's why long flights or dreamless sleep can seem like they went by in a flash. Without a memory of moments, time becomes invisible. And yet, in these timeless states, people often report feeling more connected, not less. The absence of time doesn't feel like confusion, it feels like clarity. Like stepping outside the swirl of mental chatter and landing in something still and whole. Mystics have called this unity consciousness, a merging of self and world, of now and forever. It's not scientifically measurable, but it's subjectively powerful. Could this mean that time is, in some way, a byproduct of consciousness? That we experience time only because our brains are constantly comparing states? Where we were, where we are, and where we're headed. When those comparisons fall silent, time collapses. There's a parallel here with what some physicists have suggested, that time may not be fundamental, but emergent. Just as temperature arises from the movement of atoms, perhaps time arises from the changing configurations of awareness. The more change we track, the more time we perceive, the less change, the less time. And in the extreme, complete stillness, there is no perception of time at all. This also sheds light on how different cultures interpret time. In many Western traditions, time is linear, a straight path from beginning to end. But in some Eastern philosophies, time is cyclical or even illusory. In Hinduism and Buddhism, for instance, the self and time are both seen as constructs, useful, perhaps, but not ultimately real. The goal of spiritual practice is often to transcend them, to awaken to a deeper, timeless reality beneath the illusion of passing moments. And it's not just ancient wisdom. Modern psychology has found that our emotional state can profoundly alter how we perceive time. Fear can make seconds feel like minutes. Joy can make hours vanish. The brain's internal clock is more elastic than we often realize. And meditation, or contemplative states, seem to be one of the most effective ways to stretch, or dissolve, that clock entirely. Of course, when the session ends, normal time resumes. The mind picks up its familiar tools, plans, schedules, names, events, and the timeline reappears. But something often lingers, a memory of that silence, a hint that beneath the ticking of the hours there is a deeper rhythm, or perhaps no rhythm at all. So what does it mean when time disappears from conscious experience? It might suggest that time, as we live it, is more sensation than substance, more interpretation than architecture, a layer of perception rather than a cosmic absolute. Or perhaps it means that time is both, real and not real, tangible yet transparent, like a window we usually look through, but sometimes catch ourselves looking at. And in those rare, quiet moments, whether on a mountaintop, in meditation, or just staring softly into the dark, we catch a glimpse of the world without the clock. Not because the clock has stopped ticking, but because we've stopped listening. And in that stillness we discover something curious. Time was never chasing us. We were chasing time. When you were a child, a summer felt like an entire lifetime. School holidays stretched on endlessly. A single birthday seemed to take years to return. But now, as an adult, you blink and it's autumn again. Another year slips past like a sigh. You start to wonder, why does time seem to move faster the older we get? Of course, clocks haven't changed. The Earth is still orbiting the Sun at the same speed it always has. 1 minute is still 60 seconds, no matter how many grey hairs you've earned. But our experience of time, that's a different story. And it turns out that story has some fascinating twists. Psychologists and neuroscientists have long studied this phenomenon, and while there's no single explanation, there are several overlapping ideas that help us make sense of why the years seem to accelerate with age. One of the most prominent theories is called proportional theory. It's based on the simple idea that each year we live becomes a smaller fraction of our total life. For a 5-year-old, 1 year is a full 20% of their life. That's huge. But for a 50-year-old, a year is just 2%. As we age, each new year feels smaller in proportion to all the years that came before. It's a shrinking slice of the mental pie. This makes intuitive sense. When something takes up more relative space in our lives, we tend to notice it more. Think of how slowly time seems to move when you're waiting for a kettle to boil, or sitting through a long meeting. Each second seems to demand your attention. But the more years you've lived, the less novel each passing year feels. They blend into the background, like wallpaper you've stopped noticing. That leads us to another key factor, novelty. When everything is new, your brain works harder. It pays more attention, processes more detail, and builds more vivid memories. That makes time feel full, because your brain is busy capturing everything. Think back to childhood again. Almost every experience was unfamiliar. Your first bike ride, your first time on an airplane, learning to swim, making a new friend. These moments stood out because they were packed with sensory and emotional novelty. Your brain soaked them in and stretched them out. But as adults, we fall into routines. We drive the same roads, eat the same meals, see the same faces. We switch from curiosity to efficiency. The brain, brilliant as it is, becomes a little lazy. It stops recording in high definition. It compresses the footage. Days blur, weeks vanish. This effect is why vacations often feel longer than the same number of work days. When you travel somewhere new, especially somewhere stimulating, you're flooded with unfamiliar sights, sounds, and experiences. Your brain lights up and your memory stores the trip as densely packed moments. When you look back, the vacation seems full and spacious. A single week away might feel longer than a month at home. Researchers also talk about attention-based theories of time perception. These suggest that the more attention you give to time, the slower it feels. When you're bored, waiting, or in discomfort, you monitor time more closely. And that makes each second stretch. But when you're absorbed, when you lose yourself in something like work, art, or conversation, your attention shifts. You stop tracking the clock and hours can evaporate. As we age, we often get caught in what psychologists call temporal compression. Days become predictable. We multitask. We lose track of the little things. And without those anchors of novelty or attention, our internal timeline begins to contract. It's not that time is moving faster, it's that we're gathering less of it. Fewer reference points, less sensation of passage. There's even some research suggesting that biological changes in the brain may play a role. Our internal clocks, governed in part by structures like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, may slow slightly as we age. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, which help regulate time perception, also decline over time. These shifts could subtly influence how we track short-term intervals, how long a minute feels, and contribute to the sense of time speeding up. Interestingly, some studies have shown that people with certain neurological conditions, like Parkinson's disease or ADHD, perceive time quite differently from neurotypical individuals. This highlights just how subjective time can be, how tied it is to the quirks of individual brains, rather than some universal experience. But perhaps the most powerful force behind our sense of accelerating time is memory, specifically retrospective time. When we look back on a period of life, we don't remember it second by second. We remember events, milestones, changes. If you lived a year filled with variety, challenge, or transformation, it will feel longer in hindsight. But if the year passed in a blur of sameness, it will seem short. Even if the clock measured it the same, this suggests an unexpected solution to the problem. If you want time to feel slower, or at least fuller, fill it. Seek novelty. Learn a new skill. Visit somewhere unfamiliar. Break the routine. Pay attention to your surroundings. Notice the light on the leaves, the rhythm of your breath, the scent of the morning coffee. Because when we enrich the present, we thicken our memories, and in doing so, we stretch time. There's something beautifully paradoxical about this. The more mindful you are in the moment, the less rushed time feels, and yet, looking back, those moments will seem even richer, more plentiful. Time expands when we live deeply in the now. Of course, we can't all live on permanent vacation. Routines are necessary. Habits keep the wheels turning. But even within the ordinary, we can look for sparks of newness, a different route to work, a new recipe, a quiet moment watching the sky. In the end, maybe time doesn't speed up as we age. Maybe we speed up, our days more efficient, our thoughts more rehearsed, our habits more ingrained. And in that speed, we lose the richness that once made moments feel so full. But time isn't lost. It's just waiting to be noticed again. Because the clock, after all, has never changed. Only the way we listen to it has. Few ideas stir the imagination quite like time travel. The notion of leaping backward to witness dinosaurs, or forward to see the end of the universe, has enchanted science fiction fans and theoretical physicists alike. It asks a tantalizing question. Is time fixed and linear, or is it pliable, with loops, shortcuts, and detours waiting to be discovered? In everyday experience, we all move forward through time at the same basic rate, 1 second per second. But in physics, time is far more flexible than it seems. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time can stretch and squeeze depending on gravity and speed. Near a black hole, for instance, time slows dramatically. A person orbiting close to one might experience mere hours while years pass elsewhere. That's already a kind of time travel to the future. But what about going backward? One of the most popular concepts for theoretical time travel involves wormholes. These are hypothetical tunnels through space-time, shortcuts that could, in theory, connect distant regions of the universe, or even different points in time. Imagine folding a piece of paper so 2 points touch, then poking a hole through them. That's the basic idea. General relativity allows for the existence of wormholes, though no evidence has confirmed them. More importantly, most wormhole models require something exotic to keep them open, like negative energy or exotic matter, which we don't know how to create or stabilize. Then there are cosmic strings, theoretical one-dimensional defects in space-time left over from the early universe. If two of these strings passed close to each other at near-light speeds, some physicists have suggested they might warp space-time enough to allow closed time-like curves, a kind of a loop through time. Again, this is speculative, but it shows that general relativity is more permissive than everyday logic when it comes to time. Enter the closed time-like curve, or CTC. This is a solution to Einstein's equations that permits an object to return to its own past. In geometry terms, the object traces a loop in space-time and ends up where and when it started. Mathematically it works. Physically, that's trickier. Because here's the catch. Paradoxes. The most famous is the grandfather paradox. If you travelled back in time and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you would never be born. But if you were never born, you couldn't go back in time to stop them. It's a loop that breaks itself. Many versions of this paradox exist. Destroying a time machine before it's built, handing Shakespeare the manuscript of Hamlet, or stepping on a butterfly that changes the course of evolution. To address this, physicists have proposed some clever solutions. One is the many worlds interpretation. In this view, every possible outcome of a quantum event actually occurs in a branching multiverse. So if you go back in time and make a change, you're not altering your timeline, you're creating a new one. Your original past remains intact, and the paradox disappears into parallel realities. This preserves logical consistency, but creates an infinite forest of timelines. Another possibility is the Novikov self-consistency principle. It suggests that time is more robust than we think. You can travel to the past, but whatever you do was always part of history. No matter how hard you try, you cannot create a paradox. Events will conspire to prevent it. If you try to stop your grandparents from meeting, you'll fail, because your existence proves they succeeded. Free will might feel real, but in this model, the past is unchangeable. You can visit it, but you can't rewrite it. Some physicists are deeply skeptical of time travel for precisely these reasons. While the math allows for it, the consequences seem too strange. It also raises questions about causality, the fundamental idea that causes come before effects. Time travel threatens to flip that logic. What happens if the effect causes the cause? If information or matter loops endlessly with no origin? Imagine receiving a blueprint for a time machine from your future self. You build it, use it, and pass the blueprint to your past self. Where did the original idea come from? It exists, but with no beginning. This is called a causal loop, and while it's mathematically consistent, it's philosophically dizzying. And yet physics refuses to completely shut the door on time travel. Even quantum mechanics has flirted with the idea. Some interpretations suggest particles can influence their own past states under very specific conditions. Though these quantum effects don't scale up to time machines, they hint at a universe where time might not be as strict as it seems. What's more, certain solutions to Einstein's equations, like the Gödel universe, discovered by mathematician Kurt Gödel, allow for rotating universes that naturally contain CTCs. These models are highly idealized and don't reflect our actual universe, but they show that general relativity doesn't explicitly forbid time travel. It just demands some pretty strange conditions. Still, most physicists agree that practical time travel, especially to the past, is wildly unlikely. Not just because of paradoxes, but because it would require energy and control far beyond our current capabilities. Exotic matter, precise manipulation of space-time curvature, shielding from cosmic radiation. These are all monumental challenges. And yet, the possibility continues to haunt us. Because time travel, at its heart, is about control. It asks whether we're bound to our past, or if the story can be rewritten. It pokes at our regrets, our hopes, and our wish to see what's behind the curtain of tomorrow. But it also tells us something profound about time itself. The very fact that time travel raises such strange and contradictory consequences suggests that time isn't just a line on a calendar. It's something deeply woven into the structure of reality, something that might bend, twist, or even loop under the right conditions. And if time can bend, then perhaps it's not the rigid river we often imagine. Maybe it's more like a landscape, one we've only begun to map. A landscape with valleys and ridges, shortcuts and cliffs. Some paths may circle back on themselves, others might lead forward into fog. Whether or not we ever build a time machine, the idea forces us to ask, is time fixed or flexible? Is the future already written or still being composed? Are we passengers on a one-way track, or are we the authors, dreaming up timelines as we go? One thing is certain. If time travel is possible, it won't just change our calendars, it will change our understanding of everything. Where did time begin? It's one of the strangest questions you can ask, and yet one of the most natural. Because everything we know, everything we've ever experienced, seems to take place within time. Events unfold, causes lead to effects, clocks tick, hearts beat. But was there a first tick, a very first moment? According to modern cosmology, yes. About 13.8 billion years ago, with an event we call the Big Bang. The Big Bang wasn't an explosion in space, it was the sudden expansion of space. And not just space, time too. At that moment, all of space-time blossomed into existence. Matter and energy surged outward. Galaxies began to form, and time, as far as we can tell, started ticking. But here's where it gets weird. If time began with the Big Bang, then the phrase before the Big Bang doesn't really make sense. There was no before because there was no time to be before in. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. The map just doesn't go that far. This idea is rooted in general relativity. When you try to run the equations backward toward the origin, you reach a singularity, a point where density and temperature become infinite and the laws of physics break down. At that singularity, time reaches a boundary. It's not that something happened before, it's that before ceases to be a meaningful concept. And yet, not everyone is satisfied with that. Some physicists suspect that the Big Bang wasn't truly the beginning, but more of a transitional phase, an event that arose from something deeper, stranger, and possibly timeless. One alternative is the cyclic model. In this view, the universe expands, slows, and eventually contracts, collapsing into a big crunch. After that, it rebounds in a new Big Bang. Over and over again, the universe breathes in and out, each cycle giving rise to a new era of stars, galaxies, and possibilities. Time in this model doesn't begin or end. It loops. Another idea is the bouncing universe. Instead of a single singularity, the universe undergoes a bounce from a prior contracting phase. This could erase the need for an absolute beginning and allow time to stretch infinitely in both directions. Some versions of this idea emerge from loop quantum cosmology, a theory that applies quantum rules to gravity. In these models, quantum effects smooth out the singularity, and a previous universe could leave a footprint in our own. Then there's the notion of eternal inflation. In this framework, our universe is just one bubble in a vast foam of expanding space. The inflationary process never truly ends. It keeps producing new pocket universes with their own properties and timelines. Ours had a beginning, but the multiverse itself may be eternal, with no single starting point. String theory, too, offers tantalizing possibilities. In some versions, our universe is a three-dimensional brain, floating in higher dimensional space. A collision between brains could have triggered the Big Bang, not a beginning of everything, but just the start of our local patch of reality. The larger structure, the bulk, could exist timelessly, or at least exist in a state where time behaves very differently. But what does exist even mean without time? That brings us to the truly mind-bending part. If there was no time before the Big Bang, no change, no motion, no cause or effect, can we say anything was there at all? Can something exist without duration? Our language struggles here. It's built to describe events that unfold in time. When time itself disappears, so does the grammar we use to ask questions. Some philosophers and physicists suggest that the pre-Big Bang state might have been timeless. Not empty, but unchanging. Perhaps a quantum vacuum, a mathematical possibility, or a sea of potentialities in a higher dimensional realm. In such a place, change wouldn't be required. Nothing would happen until something did. But what makes time start in a timeless place? That's one of the great mysteries. Some models propose that quantum fluctuations, random blips in a sea of probabilities, could spontaneously give rise to space, time, and energy. In a timeless void, probability still exists. Given infinite possibility, something eventually becomes. In this view, the Big Bang isn't a cause but a statistical inevitability. There's even a hypothesis that time is emergent, not fundamental to the universe, but a property that arises when systems grow complex enough. Just as temperature emerges from the motion of atoms, time might emerge from the entanglement of quantum information. In the earliest moments of the cosmos, before structure or complexity, there may have been no meaningful distinction between past and future. Time only switched on when the universe became rich enough to host it. Still, many physicists remain cautious. Our current theories, relativity, quantum mechanics, string theory, are powerful but incomplete. None have yet achieved a fully satisfying explanation of how time began, or whether it began at all. The singularity at the Big Bang is a sign that our equations are missing something. Some new insight, some deeper framework still waits in the wings. But even without all the answers, the Big Bang offers us something remarkable. A boundary, a cosmic shoreline where physics touches mystery. A place where time, that ever-present companion, might have once been absent. And when we look out at the night sky, we're not just seeing stars, we're seeing the aftermath of a moment when time itself may have begun. Every galaxy, every photon, every swirling nebula is a whisper from that strange silent beginning. So when we ask what came before the Big Bang, we might be asking the wrong kind of question. We might need new words, new ideas, or maybe even a new way to think about beginnings altogether. Because in a timeless void, perhaps nothing begins and nothing ends. It just is. Imagine pressing fast forward on the entire universe. Galaxies drift apart, stars burn out, black holes evaporate, and eventually everything fades into a cold, dark stillness. If you let the timeline stretch out far enough, one big question looms at the end. Will time itself ever stop? It's a surprisingly hard question to answer. We're used to thinking of time as endless, a backdrop to all things. But if nothing changes, if no events occur, if no clocks tick, does time still flow, or does it lose all meaning, like a song that's lost its rhythm? Let's start with the most widely accepted scenario: heat death. This is what most cosmologists believe the universe is heading toward, based on what we currently understand. In this vision of the far future, the universe keeps expanding forever. Stars burn through their fuel and die, galaxies grow cold and dim, and matter slowly decays. Black holes remain for an unimaginably long time, but even they radiate away their mass through Hawking radiation. Eventually, everything flattens out into a featureless sea of particles at the same temperature. No more gradients, no more energy flows, just cold, sparse emptiness. This is maximum entropy, the state of total thermodynamic equilibrium. In this scenario, you could wait forever, but nothing new would happen. This raises a strange point. If no change is possible, can we still say that time is passing? Philosophers and physicists have debated this. In our everyday experience, time is tied to change. If you're watching a clock and the hands don't move, it feels as though time is frozen. On a cosmic scale, if all processes stop, no movement, no decay, no thought, what's left to mark the passage of time? This leads to a provocative idea. Maybe time is change, and if everything settles into perfect stillness, perhaps time becomes meaningless. Not gone exactly, but hollow. A blank canvas no longer being painted on. But heat death isn't the only game in town. Another possible ending is the Big Rip. This depends on a mysterious force called dark energy, the thing that's accelerating the expansion of the universe. If dark energy becomes stronger over time, space could expand faster and faster until it tears everything apart. Galaxies would fly away from each other, then solar systems would unravel, then stars, then planets, then atoms, even the subatomic particles themselves. Time, in this scenario, ends not with a whisper, but a scream. But this raises a different kind of question. Is there still time during a Big Rip, even if the universe is coming undone? Or does the growing expansion stretch time itself until it breaks? It's not easy to answer, because the mathematics gets murky near the end. But the general sense is that time would keep going until it doesn't. The very fabric of space-time would disintegrate, and with it, any coherent notion of before and after. Then there's the Big Crunch, which was once the leading theory before we discovered the accelerating expansion. In this model, gravity eventually halts the outward rush of galaxies and pulls everything back inward. The universe contracts, heating up as it shrinks until all matter collapses into a singular point. In a Big Crunch, time might reverse in a sense. Entropy decreases as everything compresses. But it's also possible that this reversal is just a mirror image, not a literal rewinding. Some have proposed that if a new Big Bang follows, time might emerge again, but with no memory of what came before. And this brings us to cyclic models. What if the universe doesn't have a final end but repeats endlessly? Expansion, contraction, bounce, and birth, over and over again. In this case, time never truly ends, it just resets. But would that still be our time, or a new version with no causal link to the last? In some versions of string theory and loop quantum cosmology, the universe may bounce instead of break, sidestepping singularities and allowing for infinite cycles. Time, then, is eternal, but fragmented into epochs we'll never experience more than one of. Of course, there's a possibility that none of these scenarios is quite right. As we learn more about dark energy, quantum gravity, and the structure of the universe, new possibilities emerge. One strange idea is the emergent time hypothesis. This suggests that time isn't fundamental to the universe at all. It only emerges in certain contexts. Maybe it arose with complexity and consciousness, and might vanish again in a universe too simple or still. In this case, time would disappear not because something broke, but because the conditions needed to generate it no longer exist. It would be like temperature in a single atom. The concept doesn't apply. There's no collective movement, no heat, no time. So will time ever end? It depends on what time really is. If time is just change, then maybe. If time is a dimension built into the universe's geometry, then maybe not. It might persist even if everything else fades. If time is something we experience because we're alive and conscious, then perhaps its end is more personal than cosmic. Perhaps it ends with us. There's a certain poetry to the thought of a universe growing quiet. No more stars, no more motion, just silence stretched across eternity. A slow return to simplicity. And yet, even in that final quiet, the story of time would still echo, because everything that ever happened would still have happened. All the laughter, the light, the motion of galaxies and molecules, all the clocks, the kisses, the collapses and creations. Time, after all, isn't just about what lies ahead. It's also a record of what has been. Even if time ends, its memory may remain. Or perhaps somewhere in the deep darkness a new fluctuation will stir, a blip in the vacuum, a ripple in a sea of nothing. And from that ripple, bang, time begins again. Not an end, just a pause, and maybe, just maybe, another chance to ask the question. What is time really? Close your eyes and try to feel now. Not the word or the sound or the ticking moment between moments, but the actual now. Can you hold it? Or does it slide away as soon as you notice it? It's a strange thing, this present moment. We treat it as real, as the only real thing. But philosophers and physicists have been quietly suggesting for centuries now that the flow of time might be nothing more than a very convincing illusion. An elegant trick played on us by our own consciousness. Something we've mistaken for a fundamental feature of reality, when in fact, it might be us doing the flowing. Let's start with a few philosophical heavy hitters. Presentism is the idea that only the present exists. The past is gone, the future hasn't happened yet, and the now is the only ontological reality. It fits nicely with our intuition. After all, we remember the past, we imagine the future, but we live in the present. It feels like a knife edge slicing through a block of potential, a moving spotlight, casting shadows behind and glowing softly ahead. But then comes eternalism. This view says that past, present and future all exist equally. Time is not flowing at all. Instead, all moments are already laid out in a four-dimensional block, like a film reel or a loaf of space-time bread. You're not moving through time. Rather, your consciousness is simply located at a particular slice. Every breath you've ever taken, every laugh, every glance, they still exist somewhere in that block. You just aren't experiencing them now. A third view, called the growing block theory, attempts to split the difference. It says the past and present exist, but the future does not, yet. The block is growing, New slices are added as events occur. This view tries to preserve the sense of becoming, of newness entering the world, without denying the reality of the past. The future is open, the present is real, and the past is carved in cosmic stone. But here's where things start to unravel. If time truly flows, what does it flow in? You can say that a river flows because it moves through space and time, but if time itself is flowing, there must be some kind of meta-time for it to move through. A second, deeper time beneath time, but that just leads to more questions, more regressions, and more confusion. And so many physicists and philosophers have come to a bold conclusion. Time doesn't really flow, not in the way we think. The passage of time, the sensation that now is moving forward, is not something the universe does. It's something you do. This is sometimes called the illusion of becoming, the idea that change, movement, succession, they all depend on perception. What feels like a flowing river is really just your brain arranging snapshots into a story. Like a flip book made of neurons. Each page is static, but together they give rise to motion. Think of a dream. When you dream, your brain creates an entire sequence of events. A timeline. Things happen. You remember what just happened. You anticipate what might come. But when you wake, you realize there was no external time in the dream. It was all generated internally by your mind. Could waking life be something similar? Neurologically, there's some evidence for this. Your brain stitches together moments from slightly different times and presents them as a seamless now. Even your conscious experience lags behind reality by a tiny fraction of a second. What you feel as now is already past. This opens the door to radical questions. If time is a construct, what happens when we remove the constructor? Are trees experiencing time? Is a rock? Is the universe itself ticking away if no one is around to notice? There's a fascinating idea called the ephemeral present. It suggests that the only reason time feels like it's moving is because we have memory. If you couldn't remember anything, each moment would stand alone. There'd be no before or after, just a series of disconnected flashes. Some theorists argue that it's this linking of moments through memory that creates time, not reveals it, creates it. So where does this leave us? If time is an illusion, if it's a useful fiction stitched together by consciousness, then we might need a new way to think about existence altogether. A universe not driven by a ticking clock, but by relationships, patterns, geometry, information. In some interpretations of quantum mechanics and quantum gravity, time vanishes entirely from the equations. It's not just that we can't measure it, it's that it's not there. These formulations suggest a reality composed not of moments in sequence, but of states in relation. Change doesn't unfold, it just is. Everything exists in a web of probabilities and entanglements, and what we call time is just the way we move through it with our limited senses. Some physicists speculate that time might emerge from entanglement entropy, a measure of how much information is shared between quantum systems. As entanglement increases, a sense of direction appears, a sense of before and after, but that direction may be a local effect, a regional phenomenon, not a property of the universe, but a consequence of the observer's position within it. And then, of course, there's the human heart of the matter. If time is an illusion, does that change how we live? If the future already exists, do we still have free will? If the past is still real, does anything ever really go away? If the present is just a mental construction, where are we exactly? Perhaps these questions don't need final answers. Maybe they're meant to keep us curious, open, and slightly amazed. Because whether time is real or not, whether it flows or stands still, whether it's fundamental or fictional, it shapes our every breath, our every thought, every memory, every longing for what was and what might be, and even if it's an illusion, it's the most beautiful illusion we've ever known. We've wandered a long and curious path tonight, through ticking clocks and tangled theories, through memory, perception, physics, and poetry. Together, We've held time up to the light and turned it gently in our hands, trying to see what lies beneath its surface. And if there's one thing we've found again and again, it's this: time is not what it seems. We've seen that it bends under gravity, stretches near light, and seems to vanish in the world of quantum mechanics. It may not move at all, at least not the way we feel it move. The present moment may be a trick of the brain. The future might already exist. Or maybe there is no now at all, just a collection of changes that we assemble into a story. We've listened to ancient philosophers and modern physicists, to neuroscientists, mystics and thinkers who dare to imagine that time isn't something out there, but something in here. A creation of consciousness, a narrative framework, a quiet illusion that gives shape to life. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about time. It might be both real and unreal, both objective and personal, both measurable and mysterious. The clocks on our walls might be built from gears and atoms, but the time in our hearts is built from memories, emotions and meaning. It's okay that we don't have a final answer. Maybe we never will. Maybe time is one of those ideas that stretches beyond our reach, not because we're failing to understand it, but because part of it was never meant to be understood, only felt. When we began this journey, I asked where you were watching from. Somewhere in the world, some quiet corner, some still room where night is gently folding in. I asked for a like and a subscribe, and I thanked those already along for the ride, and I wondered aloud, only half joking, whether this video might be so interesting it keeps you awake. If it did, well, at least we shared a few thoughts, a few ideas, a few tiny ripples in the stream of the cosmos. And now, as we bring this story to a close, I hope you feel a little more comfortable with the not knowing, a little more open to the idea that time doesn't need to be solved. That curiosity is its own kind of rest, its own kind of peace, whether time is a river, a clock, a loop, or a dream. Tonight, you don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to measure it, define it, or even believe in it. You can just let it go and drift softly into sleep,